You know the vibes. PVO, positive vibes only. FOE, family over everything. High vibrations. Hope everybody's staying focused, staying clear minded, focusing on yourself, shooting all negativity down, protecting your energy, and mastering self. Want to give a great rising, a salute, much respect to all my kings and queens out there. You are great. I'm going to repeat that. You are great. You are beautiful in the inside. Don't ever let nobody tell you that you're not. As a matter of fact, look at yourself in the mirror and tell yourself how great and beautiful you are. You don't need no validation from nobody else. Today I want to talk to y'all about an iconic person, in my opinion, that we really don't know too much about. This person has ultimately, she was a victim, but her story and her victimization has a lot of significance to it. So, without further ado, we just gonna dive right into it. I don't know if you are familiar with Henrietta Lacks, American medical patient. I'm gonna give you a little backbone. I'm gonna leave the link in the description if you all would like to do some further more research as far as who this powerful individual is and was. Henrietta Lacks, Loretta Pleasant, born August 1st, 1920, in Roanoke, Virginia, United States. Died October 4th, 1951, in Baltimore, Maryland. American woman whose cervical cancer cells were the source of the HeLa cell line, research on which contributed to numerous important scientific advances. After her mother died in childbirth in 1924, her father moved with his 10 children to Clover, Virginia, where he divided them among relatives to be raised. Henrietta was thus raised by her grandfather, who was also looking after another grandchild, Henrietta's cousin, David, known as Day. Henrietta and Day were married on April 10th, 1941. Encouraged by a cousin, Day soon moved north to Maryland to work at Bethlehem Steel Sparrows Point Steel Mill, which was booming with the demand generated by World War II. Soon thereafter, Henrietta and the couple's children joined Day at Turner Station, Maryland, a community outside Baltimore where many of the African American steelworkers lived. Before her 5th pregnancy, Henrietta had sensed a knot inside her and worrisome bleeding and evidence of a lump on her cervix. Several months after giving birth, finally sent Henrietta to her doctor. She was referred to the gynecologist department at Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore, where in February 1951, a biopsy indicated the presence of a cervical tumor that had been undetected by doctors both at the birth of her son on September 19th, 1950, and at a follow-up examination 6 weeks later. After further tests, Henrietta received the first of several radium treatments, the standard of care for the day, which involved stitching small glass tubes of the radioactive metal secured in fabric pouches called Brock plagues to the cervix. While performing the procedure, the surgeon extracted two small tissue samples, one from Henrietta's tumor and one from healthy cervical tissue close by. The samples from Henrietta's cervix were among many extracted for physician George G, the head of tissue culture research at Johns Hopkins, who was searching for an immortal cell line for use in cancer research. Unlike previous samples, Henrietta's cancerous cells, called HeLa, from Henrietta Lacks, not only survived, but also multiplied at an extraordinary rate. Henrietta herself was unaware that any samples had been taken out. At that time, it was not uncommon to study patients and their tissues without their knowledge or consent. And an example of that is the Tuskegee syphilis study, and you all could do some furthermore research on that. It's crazy how they didn't need the patient's consent to do further research on anything in his or her body. Furthermore, goes to show you the type of studying that they have been doing on us for years. Black chemistry, the study of us. The whole time has been the study of us. They've been studying us in every way, shape, and form. While her cells thrived, Henrietta declined. By September, the cancer had spread throughout her body, and early the following month, Henrietta died. However, the HeLa cells, famed for their longevity, continued to thrive in culture long after Henrietta's deaths. HeLa became a ubiquitous study material, contributing to the development of drugs of numerous ailments, including polio, Parkinson's disease, and leukemia. In spite of this, until the 1970s, Henrietta's role was unknown even to her family. In the 21st century, Henrietta's case was an important component in the debate surrounding informed consent from patients in the extraction and use of cells in research. In 2013, the National Institutes of Health, NIH, granted the Lacks family control over how data on the HeLa cell genome would be used. The genome of HeLa cell line had been sequenced in full earlier that year. Two members of the Lacks family formed part of the NIH HeLa Genome Data Access Working Group, which revealed researchers' applications for access to the HeLa sequence information. So those of y'all who aren't familiar with cervical cancer is a disease characterized by the abnormal growth of cells in the cervix, the region of the uterus that joins the vagina. Cervical cancer was once a common cause of cancer deaths in women, but fatalities have been greatly reduced since the development of a pap smear in the 1940s. Cervical cancer is still fairly common in some developing countries, It occurs more often than breast cancer and is the most common form of cancer among women in those countries. So, like I said, I'm going to leave the link in the description. That was just a little brief history on Henrietta Lacks. I don't know if you all are familiar with a movie that came out on Netflix, I believe, toward the end of 2020. It was called Project Power. Yeah, I think Project Power, and it had Jamie Foxx in there. Um, it had a couple other actors in there as well that I can't think of right off the top of my head. But that movie, after watching it all the way through, I realized how they based that movie off Henrietta Lacks, this woman. And I just think it was just so crazy, you know how they always put stuff inside the movies. And it was just amazing how they did this further research on her cells, and they kept it without her knowing, kept it away from her family. And it was powerful because they showed you how, all these different powers that the people had. And the one girl, she was so powerful, she was giving life and death to, like, different things. Like when the plants would come, you would see the plants rise and grow when she would walk by. And it was because of the power that she was harnessing within herself. But I think it has something to do with that, with her cells. So I definitely encourage you all to do your research on Henrietta Lacks. She's very influential. Her story definitely must be heard if you all aren't familiar with it. Like I said, I'm gonna leave the link in the description. Also, I also do have the book. If you all aren't familiar with her book, New York Times bestseller, The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks by Rebecca Skloot. I definitely recommend that you all read this book. It can give you a furthermore breakdown and backbone, some furthermore information as far as her story. As a matter of fact, I'll read a little bit of it for you all. The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. Doctors took her cell without asking. Those cells never died. They launched a medical revolution and a multi-million-dollar industry. More than 20 years later, her children found out their lives will never be the same. So that's another thing too. They also took her cells without her knowing, without her consent. They did all this further research on her cells and all these studies, and they actually came up with immortality as a result of them studying her cells, because whatever was in it. And they didn't even tell her children. They didn't tell nobody at all. That shit's crazy. That shit is crazy. I highly recommend you all read this book. That's a little sample of some of her cells. It's a very nice book, by the way. I've started a few chapters of it. I'm pretty sure you can find it on Amazon, Book of Millions, Barnes and Nobles. Just typing in online. I'm going to just read a few words about this book. This is a work of nonfiction. No names have been changed, no characters invented, no events fabricated. While writing this book, I conducted more than 1,000 hours of interviews with family and friends of Henrietta Lacks, also as well as with lawyers, scientists, and journalists who've written about the Lacks family. I also relied on intensive archival photos and documents, scientific and historical research, and the personal journals of Henrietta's daughters, Deborah Lacks. I've done my best to capture the language with which each person spoke and wrote. Dialogue appears in native dialects. Passages from diaries and other personal writings are quoted exactly as written. As one of Henrietta's relatives said to me, if you pretty up how people spoke and change the things they said, that's dishonest. It's taking away their lives, their experiences, and their selves. In many places, I've adopted the words interviewees used to describe their worlds, and experiences. In doing so, I've used the language of their times and backgrounds, including words such as colored. Members of the Lacks family often refer to John Hopkins as John Hopkins, and I've kept their usage when they're speaking. Anything written in the first person in Deborah Lack's voice is a quote of her speaking, edited for length and occasionally clarity. Since Henrietta Lacks died decades before I began writing this book, I relied on interviews, legal documents, and her medical records to recreate scenes from her life. In those scenes, dialogue is either deduced from the written record or quoted verbatim as it was recounted to me in a interview. Whenever possible, I conducted multiple interviews with multiple sources to ensure accuracy. The extract from Henrietta's medical record in chapter 1 is a summary of many desperate notations. The word HeLa used to refer to cells grown from Henrietta Lacks cervix occurs throughout the book. It is pronounced HeLa. About chronologically, dates for scientific research refer to when the research was conducted, not when it was published. In some cases, those dates are approximate because there is no record of exact start dates. Also, because I moved back and forth between multiple stories and scientific discoveries occurred over many years, there are places in the book where, for the sake of clarity, I describe scientific discoveries sequentially. Sequentially, I'm fucking that up. My bad, family. Even though they took place during the same general period of time, the history of Henrietta Lacks and the HeLa cells raises important issues regarding science, ethics, race, and class. I've done my best to present them clearly within the narrative of the Lacks story, and I've included an afterward addressing the current legal and ethical debate surrounding tissue ownership and research. There is much more to say on all the issues, but that is beyond the scope of this book. So I will leave it for scholars and experts in the field to address. I hope readers will forgive any omissions. Once again, I'm sorry, family. Once again, this is the book, The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. I gave you all a brief article on her. I'm going to leave the link in the description. I highly recommend, if you aren't familiar with her, to, you could check the link out in the description, do your own research on her. The book that I showed you all, I highly recommend you all read the book just to get up to speed and up to date on things that's going on. This go right hand in hand with them taking her tissues and her cells and doing research on it without her consent and without her not even knowing, that her family finding out, decades later. That just, It's just fucked up. It just goes hand in hand with all the other stuff that they're already out here doing. How they studying us, how they taking our organs and taking different body parts and just all kinds of stuff. I highly recommend that you all, be aware of your surroundings, be aware of what's going on. Don't just keep rolling with the flow. Do research, question everything. Nothing is off the table. Question everything. Like I said, you all should go check out that movie, Project Power. It goes hand in hand with the Henrietta story. I hope you all stay focused, stay balanced, stay clear minded, and I love y'all.